SEP Fanfic Readings presents What the Room Requires by Alydia Rackham. Chapter 13, Day 18. Hermione. So you like this Mr. Darcy character? I happen to think he's wonderful. Tosh. No, really, I insisted, watching my feet as I kicked along through the barley. Draco beside me, the full sun beaming down on us. He had his hands in his pockets and his head hung low in thought. Why? He wondered. I shrugged. The wind, warm and friendly once more, caught my hair so that I had to tuck it behind my ear for the 100th time. He's a gentleman, protective, brooding, honorable, serious, brilliant, mysterious, interesting. Yeah, but he certainly dawdles a lot about, don't you think? I glanced at him. He raised his eyebrows. I frowned, considering. I don't know. I mean, he knows he likes Elizabeth from almost the second time he sees her, Draco gestured. But he doesn't do anything about it, except argue with her. And then she almost gets whisked away by that Wickham fool. He swept his hand across, then put it back in his pocket. And it was only because Wickham turned out to be a moron that she started to think of Mr. Darcy again. I pulled off the top of the stalk and split it in half with my fingernails. I suppose. Draco kicked his head back. If it'd been me, I would have said something to her straight away. But she didn't like Mr. Darcy, remember? I reminded him. Draco glanced at me, listening. She thought he was rude and full of himself, I said. He could change her mind, he answered. I nodded. Yes, by proving that he's a good man, I said, which would be difficult after he insulted her like that. Draco shrugged and made a face. Then she's too touchy. I laughed. Well, I know I wouldn't appreciate it if somebody thought I wasn't pretty enough to dance with. Impossible, Draco said flatly. I looked at him. What? I said, confused. But his brow was still furrowed, his gaze distant. And what about the ending? He prompted. You like the ending? I canted my head, then put my hands down to brush the tops of the barley. I do admit that it felt rather anticlimactic for the first time I read it, I confessed. I was expecting, well, kissing. I blushed and put on a crooked smile. But when I looked at Draco, he was perfectly serious. Well, yes, I suppose, I managed. He nodded. Yeah, me too. I was impatient for it the whole time. My eyebrows shot up. You were? Of course, Draco said like I was thick. That's the point, isn't it? And then, nothing. Not nothing, I corrected. Oh, yes, he snorted. A walk in the park, talking about their differences and all the times they miscommunicated. That's scintillating. I gagged back another laugh. Well, I tried. I'm quite fond of the films that made Pride and Prejudice. The newest one with Keira Knightley has a kiss. Really? He sounded surprised. Well, that's brilliant, and once you tell me what the heck a film is, that'll actually mean something to me. You have to know what a film is. I looked at him in disbelief. Oh, yes, because I enjoy admitting to you that I don't know something. He laughed. I frowned, trying to think. It's a big, well, if you're in a theater, it's a big, moving, talking picture that tells a story. Like a photograph, Draco tried to clarify. Well, yes, but with sound and music, I said. And it shows the whole blinking novel? He winced. No, well, at least the Keira Knightley version doesn't. The BBC gets close to showing the whole thing. He gave me a blank look. The BBC? I repeated. Draco stopped. So did I. He gave me a narrow look, then stepped forward and tapped his finger on my forehead. Remember who you are with, Granger, he said sternly. Muggle moving picture magic wasn't allowed in my house. Muggle moving picture magic, I crowed. Ah! He grinned and rolled his eyes and started walking again. I'd have just kissed her. I blinked. You what? He shrugged again. Why not? I would have wanted to if I were Darcy. And it gets the point across a lot quicker than all that blathering. I didn't know whether to laugh or blush or what. I wound up doing both, but Draco just chuckled, pulled up a long stalk, and began nonchalantly tickling the back of my neck with it. And so I had to evade him, and I forgot that image in my head of Mr. Darcy transforming into Draco Malfoy, sweeping Elizabeth off her feet. Hermione. See? That's rather good. You're not looking. I'll look in a moment. I have to finish this bit. No, look right now. Draco, you're such a baby, I sighed. Then I looked up from where I was lying to see the piece of paper Draco was holding up. My eyebrows raised. That is rather good, I admitted. The little door in the ground had supplied us with 2 drawing pads and 2 boxes of colored pencils today, and we had been doodling and sketching all afternoon. sprawled out on the soft grass inside the willow. Draco had given me the blanket to lie on and the chessboard to use as a desk. He was sitting up, leaning against the root just across from me, using Pride and Prejudice to support his paper. Now, though, he was holding up a brilliant picture of a twisted, fire-breathing dragon. It looked like a Norwegian ridgeback. "Let's see what you've got," he said, leaning closer. "Oh, no, no." I dove across my picture, shielding it with my arms. "Come off it, really? I showed you the one I did," he cried, scooting closer and trying to pry my arms up. "No, it's not nearly as good." I grimaced as I finally let him pull the paper free. He lifted it and looked at it for a second. "It's a flower," he said. "Ha!" I sat up. "Well, at least it's recognizable." "It's a daffodil," he said, throwing me a grin. "See? Can't be that bad. I'm terrible at guessing games. I always fail at Pictionary and such." "Pictionary?" I cried. "You play Pictionary?" "In the dormitories," he nodded. "We have to draw the pictures with our wands. It's a bit complicated, but I hardly ever played after Flint the Face beat me." "Flint the Face?" I gasped, laughing so hard I could barely breathe. "An apt name, don't you think?" Draco smirked. "That's not nice." "Not nice?" He flashed his eyebrows. "That's my middle name." "Well, if you're terrible at Pictionary," I snickered, "I believe we found a new game." Draco. I sat, leaning against a root, gazing through the little gaps in the window curtain at the darkness that had fallen. To my right lay the chessboard, bearing 3 of Hermione's drawings, and my black knight serving as a paperweight. Then, just past that, was Hermione, parallel to me. Her head was on my Slytherin pillow, her body covered in the blanket, asleep. I watched her as she laid there, my arms folded across my chest. Every night in recent past, she had gone all the way to the other side of the room to attempt to sleep. This time, she had wrapped up in her blanket that tucked the pillow next to her without almost thinking, as she was in the middle of painstakingly coloring in her daffodil. Gradually, she had sunk until she was lying low, her hand still at work on the picture that lay on the chessboard. Then she had just faded away, her eyelids fluttering closed. Her delicate hand now rested on the petals of her drawn daffodil. I studied it a moment. How soft it looked. Then I glanced around. Surrounding us was a litter of paper, some pieces in halves, others completely covered in scribbles. Neither of our drawing pads had survived our game of Pictionary, and I had accidentally broken the lead of the blue pencil, which had caused Hermione to scold me brutally enough to make me grin. I felt like gathering the pages up. I had no inclination to pitch them, but I didn't want to make any noise and disturb her. My gaze fell on her again, and she flitted over her smooth face, dark eyebrows and lashes, and perfect nose and mouth, then the curves of her hair. I'd meant it before, even though it had surprised me. It was impossible for Hermione not to be thought pretty. I took a deep breath, my brow furrowing. She hadn't said anything. I had expected her to, after I handed her that black knight out in the field. I had expected her to, but I hadn't known what on earth I would have said. And then she spared me by staying silent. During the past day or two, I felt so content just to be with her and not to be in pain that several agreeable comments had just fallen out of my mouth, and I found myself smiling more than was normal. I often felt her looking at me strangely, or intently, but if she thought I'd gone off my nut, she kept it to herself. And then she seemed to forget about the fact that I was acting oddly cheerful and became more cheerful herself. She even started to disagree with me again, which, startlingly, was refreshing as the wind off the sea. And it was actually pleasant, bantering with her, when we both kept the bite of our comments. It was amusing, really. I don't remember when I'd laughed like that. Hermione turned over on her side, facing me. Her fair brow furrowed, and she grunted softly. I looked at her, and she took a deep breath, then held it, and frowned harder. She let out another small moan and kicked off the blanket. I watched her a moment, uncertain, then got up, wincing, and tried not to tread on any of the papers. I stepped around the chessboard and picked the blanket up, then pulled it back over her and tucked it up by her shoulder. Then I just eased down behind her and sat there, my hip by her back. Then I took a deep breath and began to sing. My voice really wasn't the loveliest in the world, I knew that, but I also knew the way this magic worked, and I didn't care what I sounded like, and I hadn't sung to Hermione for a very long time. I couldn't remember the last time she had actually slept, or the last time I actually cared. Narrator's note, this next song, again, I'd never heard, and when I looked it up, it is called Courtyard Lullaby. It sounds very pretty. It's a Scottish lullaby, but I am not remotely going to try to sing that. Where in the deep night sky the stars lie in its embrace, the courtyard still in its sleep, and peace comes over your face. The little golden lights, yes, they were gold this time, not blue, drifted up out of the grass, and rested on her head and shoulder, and set her aglow. Fascinated, I had to remind myself to keep singing. Come to me, it sings. Hear the pulse of the land, the ocean's rhythms pull, to hold your heart in its hand. And when the wind draws strong across the cypress trees, the night birds cease their song, so gathers memories. Last night you spoke of a dream, where forests stretched to the east, and each bird sang its song, a unicorn joined in a feast. And in a corner stood a pomegranate tree, with wild flowers there no mortal eye could see. I sensed Hermione relax. Her shoulders loosened again. I gazed down at her features. How was it that suddenly I had gone from detesting the sight of her to being unable to keep my eyes off of her? Who cares about pure-blood, half-blood, mud-blood nonsense in here? Interestingly, I was finding that it mattered less and less. It was like something that had troubled me in a dream, but the lengthening daylight hours had caused it to fade back. In fact, I wasn't sure it mattered at all anymore. I could see clearly for the first time in my life, and all I saw was a girl who had looked me in the eyes once and said she had forgiven me. And as for myself, the only task I had in the world was to do that forgiveness justice.